Marcus's phone buzzed while he was cutting crown molding. The blade was still spinning. He froze mid-cut, the whine of the saw filling the room as he read the message from the school. 2 sentences. No explanation. Zoe will not be advancing. We recommend alternative. Placement. He read it again, then a third time. Nothing changed. Marcus stood there in a stranger's house, sawdust hanging in the air, realizing something had just been decided without him. Not discussed, not questioned, decided. The meeting confirmed it. Zoe was brilliant, the principal said. Exceptional even, but disruptive. Curious in ways the curriculum didn't allow. Ahead of her peers in ways that made adults uncomfortable. We think she'd be happier somewhere else. Marcus heard what she didn't say. Your daughter doesn't belong here, and we're done trying to make space. He walked out with a thin folder and a thicker understanding. The system had just rejected his child. What Marcus didn't know yet was this. That message wasn't the end of Zoe's future. It was the moment everything broke open. Marcus sat in a plastic chair that had been designed by someone who had never actually sat in a chair, holding a folder so thin it was almost translucent. Inside were Zoe's test scores from 3 months ago and a letter that said, in polite bureaucratic language, that his daughter would not be advancing to the 5th grade. She was smart. The letter made that clear. But the school had concerns, behavioral issues, social integration challenges, a tendency to work ahead of curriculum. Translation: his daughter didn't fit into the neat rows and columns of public education in a district that had stopped investing in anything except standardized testing. The principal, Mrs. Hawthorne, sat across from him at a desk that was slightly too high, a power move so obvious it was almost funny. She had silver hair and the kind of careful makeup that suggested she spent her mornings preparing for judgment rather than teaching children. We think Zoe might benefit from summer remediation, Mrs. Hawthorne was saying, to help her catch up socially. Catch up. As if brilliance was a deficit, Marcus didn't argue. Arguing had never changed anything for him. He nodded, took the paperwork, and left. He was a contractor. He built decks, renovated kitchens, fixed houses that rich people wanted to flip. He worked with his hands and his back, and his ability to show up on time, which apparently was a rarer quality than anyone would admit. The work was steady, but seasonal. He made enough to keep Zoe in decent clothes and the apartment in a neighborhood where the gunshots didn't wake her most nights. That evening, Zoe asked about the meeting. School thinks you should do summer camp, Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. Zoe, who was 10 and had her mother's high cheekbones and Marcus's serious eyes, looked out the window of their second-floor apartment. She could see the parking lot and beyond it, the street where kids her age hung around in clusters, having conversations she didn't understand. I don't want to go to camp, Zoe said. I know, baby. I want to go to a real school. Marcus didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, Marcus was working on a renovation in a part of the city he rarely entered. It was the kind of neighborhood where the houses didn't need to be flipped because they'd never gotten broken in the first place. The place was a 1970s colonial, owned by a woman named Patricia Okonkwo. She was a documentary filmmaker, Marcus learned, though he didn't know what that meant exactly. She talked to him while he was installing new crown molding in her study. Are you from around here? Patricia asked, holding a cup of coffee that probably cost more than Marcus made in an hour. Grew up south, Marcus said, focusing on the angle of the molding. Live south of here now. You have family? Marcus was not the type of person who shared personal information with clients, but something about Patricia's tone, genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk, made him answer. Daughter. She's 10. Patricia set down her coffee. She looked at the crown molding Marcus was installing, which was perfect, precise, the kind of work that revealed character. What's her name? Zoe. That's a beautiful name. Is she in school? Marcus told her about the meeting. He didn't know why, but Patricia listened in a way that suggested she was actually hearing what he was saying, not just waiting for her turn to talk. What does Zoe want to do? Patricia asked. Learn, Marcus said. Actually learn, not just sit still and take tests. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My foundation works with schools in the district. We fund alternative programs. What's Zoe's main interest?" Marcus had to think about this. Zoe had interests in everything, but when he watched her, she seemed most absorbed when she was solving problems. She would sit with a book about coding or mathematics or physics, and she would disappear into it in a way that looked like peace. "She likes how things work," Marcus said finally. "Why things work?" Patricia nodded slowly. "I want to help." Marcus immediately felt the walls go up. Help was a word that came with strings. Help meant debt. Help meant owing someone. "I appreciate it," Marcus said carefully, "but we're okay." "I'm not offering charity," Patricia said. She said it in a way that made him believe it. "I'm offering a connection. My foundation has a partnership with an experimental school across town. They don't do grades. They don't do standardized testing. They do something different. I think Zoe might fit there." She pulled out her phone and typed something. "My colleague, Dr. Amma, runs the program. She's expecting your call tomorrow. She'll want to meet Zoe." Marcus took the phone number. He didn't call the next day, or the day after. He held the number like a secret, something that existed in possibility, but not yet in reality. It was Zoe who changed that. She found the number on a piece of paper on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" she asked. "A woman I worked for thought you might like a different school. Can I call her?" Marcus wanted to say no. He wanted to protect his daughter from the disappointment of something that wouldn't work out. But he recognized that instinct as the same one that was keeping him small, and he thought about what he wanted Zoe to become. "Yeah," he said. "You can call her." Dr. Amma Asante was a woman in her 60s with gray locks and the kind of voice that made you listen. Her school was in a converted warehouse that smelled like paint and possibility. When Marcus and Zoe arrived for the visit, the first thing Zoe noticed was that there were no desks facing a teacher. Instead, there were clusters of tables, some with computers, some with art supplies, some with books and notebooks scattered around like the people using them had just stepped away for water. "We call it a discovery model," Dr. Amma was explaining to Marcus, but she was looking at Zoe. "Students identify problems they want to solve. We provide resources and mentorship. The learning emerges from the work, not the other way around." "What about standardized testing?" Marcus asked. He had to ask. It was the language his world spoke. "We don't participate," Dr. Amma said simply. "We measure growth through portfolios, through projects, through demonstrated competence, not through a single metric." Zoe was already moving through the space. She had gravitated toward a table where two teenagers were working on what looked like a small robot. She watched them, asking questions Marcus couldn't hear from where he stood. "The tuition is..." Dr. Amma named a number that made Marcus's chest tight. "My foundation covers 90% for students we believe in," Dr. Amma continued. "Zoe would be one of those students. Your cost would be minimal." Marcus watched his daughter's face as she leaned in to look at the robot's circuitry. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath and was finally allowed to exhale. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would you do this?" Dr. Amma was quiet for a moment. "Because I was a Zoe once. I wanted to understand how things worked, and I had people who believed that my questions mattered. I had people who didn't try to make me smaller to fit into their system. I'm trying to be that for others now." She looked at him directly. "And because I see something in her that the world will try to diminish, my job is to prevent that." Zoe started at the Discovery School in September. For the first month, Marcus waited for something to go wrong. He had spent his whole life knowing that good things were temporary, that something was always about to break, but nothing broke. Zoe was different. Not changed, but unlocked. She came home excited in a way that was foreign to her. She talked about her project. She was building a water filtration system for a neighborhood that had contaminated wells. She was learning chemistry and engineering and environmental policy, but not because it was on a test. She was learning it because she needed it to solve a problem she cared about. Patricia Okonkwo came by the apartment one evening. She had become a strange kind of regular in their lives, showing up with takeout or asking how the filtration project was progressing. She treated Zoe like a person with real ideas instead of a child to be managed. That night, she brought news. "I'm working on a documentary about education inequality," Patricia said, setting down food from a restaurant that had actual cloth napkins. "I want to feature Zoe. Her story, her school, what she's building. Is that something you'd be willing to do?" Marcus's first instinct was no. He didn't want attention. Attention was dangerous. Attention was what got you noticed, and being noticed had never been safe for people who looked like him. But Zoe, who was 10 and understood things he was still learning, said, "Dad, you said I should do things that matter." So he said yes. The documentary footage was shot over 3 months. Patricia was careful and present. She filmed Zoe at work, interviewed Dr. Amma, talked to the other students about what they were learning. But she also filmed Marcus. She filmed him working on a renovation, his hands precise and deliberate. She filmed him and Zoe cooking dinner together. She filmed the ordinary beauty of their life together. When the documentary premiered at a film festival, it had a title: "The Questions She Asked." The impact was immediate and strange. Media outlets picked it up. Education think tanks cited it. Parents started requesting admission to Dr. Amma's school. But more importantly, schools that had been operating on the standardized testing model started asking questions about whether that was really the best way. For Marcus, the impact was different. He started getting calls. Other families who had seen the documentary wanted to hire him specifically, not just for his work, though they commented on that. They wanted to hire him because they had seen him in a documentary, which meant they thought they understood something about him. One of those families was the Mitchells. They wanted a complete kitchen renovation. They wanted to discuss it with Marcus over dinner. He sat at their table, a long slab of reclaimed wood that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and listened to them talk about their lives. The wife was a lawyer. The husband was in finance. They had one daughter, Emma, who was 8. "We saw the documentary," the wife Jennifer said. "We were struck by the relationship between you and Zoe, how you clearly support her in pursuing her own path rather than forcing her into a mold." Marcus shifted in his chair. He didn't know how to respond to people talking about his parenting like it was a philosophy rather than the simple result of loving his child and wanting better for her. "We're looking for someone to mentor Emma," the husband David said bluntly. "She's interested in architecture and design. We wondered if you'd be willing to show her how you approach your work. What you consider when you're building something." Marcus almost said no. But then he thought about what Patricia had said to him, about connections, about how everyone deserved someone who believed in them. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." Emma Mitchell started coming to his job sites every Saturday. She was serious and curious, the way Zoe had been before the regular school had started teaching her to doubt herself. Marcus showed her how to read blueprints, how to think about flow and function, and the hidden structures that held things up. She was a fast learner. By the end of the summer, Emma understood load-bearing walls and cabinet design better than most contractors. But more importantly, Marcus saw her beginning to believe that she could understand anything if she was curious enough. One day, near the end of the Mitchell kitchen project, David pulled Marcus aside. "I want to hire you to consult on something bigger," David said. He pulled out a folder. "We're working with a group of architects to design a community center for a neighborhood that's been underserved. We need someone who understands how that community actually lives and works. Someone with real insight." "I'm a contractor," Marcus said, "not an architect." "No," David agreed. "You're someone who understands how to build something functional. That's worth more than a degree in some cases." Marcus was brought onto the project, not as a consultant who was there to agree with the architects, but as a voice that asked questions they hadn't considered. Why was the kitchen in a community center facing away from the gathering space? Wouldn't you want to see the people you were cooking for? Why were the bathrooms in a corner? Wouldn't families need something closer to the children's area? His questions were simple, but they changed how the space was conceived. A year after the documentary premiered, there was a ribbon cutting for the new community center. The mayor came, local press came. But what Marcus noticed was the people from the neighborhood who came because they had been heard in the design process, because someone had asked them what they needed instead of deciding for them. Zoe was there too. She was 11 now, deep in her filtration project, which had expanded to include water quality testing for 5 different neighborhoods. Dr. Ama's school had featured her work at an education conference. College programs were already reaching out. Patricia was filming again, capturing the ribbon cutting, but also the quieter moments. Marcus and Zoe standing together, looking at the building. Emma Mitchell walking through with her parents, pointing out the design decisions that had come from conversations with the community. Later, when most of the crowd had dispersed, Dr. Ama found Marcus in the community center's kitchen. "I wanted you to know something," she said. "Zoe won't remember this probably, but I met you the same way you met Patricia. I was struggling. I had this vision of a different kind of school, but I couldn't fund it. And someone believed in me enough to make the connection, to introduce me to someone who could help." She looked around the kitchen. "That person is gone now, but they taught me something. That connection is the most valuable resource we have. More than money, more than credentials. Believing in someone and then connecting them to the right people, that changes everything." Marcus didn't know what to say. "I'm saying that because I want you to know what you're doing," Dr. Ama continued. "You're not just building a center. You're modeling for Emma and for Zoe what it looks like to take your gift seriously, to let other people see your real self. Most people spend their entire lives trying to hide. You're showing them it's possible to be visible and safe at the same time." 2 years later, Marcus was invited to speak at a national education conference. Him, a contractor who had dropped out of college, but they wanted to hear from him about what he had learned from the documentary, from working with Zoe, from bringing his perspective to the community center design. He almost declined. But Zoe said, "Dad, you said I should do things that matter." He was learning to listen to his daughter. The speech was simple. He talked about watching Zoe's light in the regular school get dimmer, and then watching it get brighter again when she was allowed to be curious. He talked about how architects had designed a space that didn't function for the people who would use it because they hadn't asked those people what they needed. He talked about how being visible, really visible, with your actual self, your actual perspective, was terrifying, but it was also how you changed things. He talked about a woman named Patricia, who had seen something in him and believed it was worth developing. About Dr. Ama, who had done the same for Zoe. About how the world changed not through grand gestures, but through people deciding that other people mattered. After the speech, people wanted to hire him, for consulting, for speaking, for building projects. But Marcus turned most of them down. He still wanted to build with his hands. He still wanted to be present for Zoe in the way that mattered, showing up, being steady, letting her become whoever she was becoming. What he did was selective. He worked on projects that served communities. He mentored people like Emma, showing them that intelligence and curiosity and a willingness to learn could take you further than credentials ever could. Zoe, at 13, was being recruited by universities to participate in research projects. She was building filtration systems that were actually being installed in communities with water contamination. She was becoming the kind of person who would solve problems that mattered. And when people asked her how she got here, she said, "My dad showed me that you don't have to fit into the system. You just have to find the people who believe your questions matter." One evening, Marcus was in the kitchen of the apartment they still lived in, because there was no reason to leave. He was making dinner while Zoe worked on her latest project at the table. She was older now, but still serious, still curious about how things worked. "Dad," she said, "do you think that man at my old school ever realized he was wrong about me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He didn't know if Mrs. Hawthorne ever thought about Zoe, or if she was still trying to fit children into boxes that had never been designed for them. "I don't know," he said finally. "But it doesn't matter. You know who you are, and that matters more than what anyone else thinks." Zoe nodded, already turning back to her work. Marcus looked at his daughter, this remarkable human who had emerged from his decision to stand firm, to say no to systems that didn't serve her, to believe that there was another way. And he understood something that took him a long time to learn. Standing up isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up and being real. Sometimes it's believing in your child so completely that they can't help but believe in themselves. Sometimes it's the most powerful thing you can do.